We're picking up Chapter 14, Late Adulthood, with the portion regarding staying healthy, and we'll also include in this changes in cognition in late adulthood. To stay healthy, older adults need sufficient nutrition. They don't digest their food as well as before and can't utilize the nutrients as efficiently. Many older adults are taking various medications that interfere with the absorption of various types of nutrients. Even aspirin or antibiotics, antacids or laxatives can interfere with nutrition. And many older people are also taking prescription medications that might influence their nutritional needs. Older people need fewer calories, yet need to obtain all these nutrients in a diet of somewhat less food. Therefore, they need to eat a more nutritionally dense diet. Nutritional deficiencies can cause serious problems. For example, a vitamin B deficiency can impair cognition and can appear as if the older person is beginning to slip away mentally. The most common problem nutritionally with older people is a failure to drink enough liquids, actually not something having to do with food. In fact, older people can become dehydrated, which can lead to further problems. Exercise is an important part of staying healthy in late adulthood. Our older people benefit from regular exercise. Those who are debilitated, who have suffered weakness in their body, benefit from resistance exercises that strengthen the muscles. Most exercise classes, team sports, and exercise equipment, though, is designed for the young. There's a need for exercise classes and team sports that would be attractive to the older person and designed for them. And in fact, the social aspect of that approach would help older adults maintain their interest in that exercise. Any movement is better than inactivity in late adulthood. Maybe the only thing that the person can do physically would be to, say, stand up from a sitting position, but even doing that repeatedly can help strengthen the muscles and prevent further disability, or can even help them regain function, become stronger. Regular exercise can also compress morbidity, and help to stave off illness and disability until later in life. Many older people, though, need to accommodate their exercise to limitations and disabilities that they have encountered. And this may require what they call selective optimization with compensation. That's really just a fancy way to say that the older person optimizes their ability to do activities that they previously did by compensating for their limitations. For example, an older person maybe previously had exercise, running frequently or jogging, but finds that now they can't do that because it's too hard on their joints. At this point, they might discover that swimming or maybe walking for longer periods of time can enable them to continue to exercise just in a different way, thereby overcoming their limitations. This is what we call selective optimization with compensation. Another part of staying healthy in late adulthood would be to avoid damaging falls. Many older people are less active due to a fear of falls, and there's some good reason for that, because falls are the leading cause of accidental death after age 60. But that said, only 6% of falls in this age group actually cause serious injury. So to a great extent, the fears that people have may be an exaggeration of the actual dangers. That said, it's a good idea for the older person to take some precautions, to have good shoes with non-slip soles that don't have too much padding that would interfere with balance, and then avoiding slippery surfaces like icy sidewalks. Thank God we don't have too many icy sidewalks here in the valley, but where that's the case would be something that they would need to potentially avoid. Of course, here would be also having handrails where necessary. For example, stairways would be important. They've also found that exercise that strengthens the body and improves balance can help prevent falls. In one study done in a nursing home, residents who learned Tai Chi movements and practiced them regularly had significantly fewer falls than residents who did not do so. Excess disability occurs when the person's fears are in excess of the danger. The person then begins restricting their activity. Even those who are able then may become disabled as they are less and less active and muscles weaken. Another part of staying healthy in late adulthood would be to avoid drug abuse. And believe it or not, addiction can begin in late adulthood. When it does occur at this point in time, it's most likely an addiction to alcohol or prescription medications. Those who live alone are at an increased risk of alcoholism for a couple reasons. One is that they may be somewhat lonely and might take to drinking to sort of trying to feel better. And then secondly, because they're alone, there's no one there that's monitoring how much they're drinking or able to tell them that they're drinking too much and make them more aware of the problem. Now, whereas excess alcohol consumption is detrimental, they did find a moderate use of alcohol in late adulthood can be beneficial. A glass or two of wine or beer a day benefits the heart and may postpone dementia, may postpone mental decline. So once again, moderate use, moderation seems to be the way to go. Now, when we see an older person whose speech is slurring, who's walking unsteadily, or seems confused, we might just attribute that to old age. But these sorts of things are not normal signs of aging. Or we see this in older people, we need to have a look and see if these are not potentially a sign of a drug abuse problem. Maximum lifespan is the longest any member of a species lives. For humans, so far as we can tell, that's somewhere around 122 years. Average life expectancy is how long the average person within a particular group lives. We've had dramatic increases of average life expectancy here in the U.S. due to immunizations, sanitation, medical care, safe water, and the development of antibiotics. People live a lot longer because health problems due to a lack of these practices and medical advances cause health problems that shorten the lifespan. Here in the U.S. today, people's life expectancy for men is 76 years at birth. For women at birth, their life expectancy is 81. If you live to a certain point, then your life expectancy from there on increases. If you live to age 65, you're likely to live to age 84. If you live to age 80, your life expectancy at that point rises to 90. Now here in the U.S., we are only better than half of other nations that keep records on average life expectancy. So half actually live longer than we do. Obviously, there could be room for improvement here. Why do people age? Well, there's a number of theories. The first being wear and tear. And this theory says, well, just like a car, parts of the body begin wearing down. And that's true for some things. For example, joints do wear with use, and eventually they may wear to the point that they begin to create problems. And this occurs when the body is not able to repair the joints as rapidly as the wear occurs. Another theory of aging would say, well, we have a genetic clock. Various genes regulate how long the person lives, regulating various processes. This might help account for why some people live longer than others. And then cellular aging, this theory would suggest that as the cells are divided and reproduce to replace old ones, that errors in the genetic code accumulated until finally the cells begin to malfunction and finally no longer divide. And that theory is consistent with the Hayflick limit. A researcher named Hayflick some years ago placed human cells in a test tube and observed that the cells only would divide a limited number of times, and then they stopped dividing, stopped reproducing themselves. And so it was suggested that there was a built-in limit to how long we live. Now, some critics would say, well, but that was a test tube experiment that doesn't necessarily demonstrate what happens in living humans, although that's a pretty strong suggestion that this is part of the aging process. Now, sometimes we have people that then want to come up with anti-aging protocols, but that may be kind of a contradiction in terms. These theories suggest that while we might slow down the aging process, that there's probably no way to completely stop it from occurring at some point in time. So probably a more reasonable, realistic goal would be to prevent premature disability, to compress morbidity, in other words, to try to postpone illness and disability to as late in life as possible, avoid disability, and increase the person's vitality while they still are living. Now, some attempts to extend the lifespan have occurred. Some of these are based on animal studies, and we don't know if they'll transfer to humans. For example, the calorie restriction routine. This was based on studies with rats. When they reduced the calorie intake of rats, they did live longer, but we don't know for sure if this will work with humans. This protocol, though, the person severely reduces their energy intake while taking care to consume all the essential nutrients, and often that becomes a difficult balancing act, trying to get those nutrients while still maintaining a significantly lower calorie intake. Now, another approach which seems to be somewhat more promising would be to increase the intake of antioxidant nutrients. These antioxidants reduce cellular damage that is done by substances called free radicals. The textbook mentions one, resveratrol, something that is derived from the skins of grapes and also present in red wine, but many other food substances have antioxidants as well. And we are likely to get more antioxidants in our diet if we eat unprocessed foods rather than heavily processed foods. Now, that said, again, long-term effects not quite known at this point, but the suggestion reducing inflammation in the body by increasing antioxidants seems to be more promising. As people get older, their brain slows down, and the brain does not process information and communicate within itself as rapidly as before. A couple reasons for that. There are the production of neurotransmitters is reduced, smaller quantities of these neurotransmitters, and blood flow to the cerebral cortex also is reduced as people get older. Now, in fact, speed of processing is crucial for rapid cognition, to think quickly. This may be the G factor, the foundation for all aspects of intelligence that Charles Spearman referred to in his theory of intelligence. As people get older, then their reaction times slow. Often they will compensate for this by allowing more time. For example, when driving, when they will look more carefully before they make a turn. And the brain processes information more slowly as well. That makes it difficult for the person to hold on to large amounts of information mentally while analyzing that information. They also find that there is some shrinkage of the brain that is a normal part of aging. The hypothalamus shrinks somewhat, which may influence memory processes. The prefrontal cortex as well, which is responsible for our ability to plan ahead, to inhibit various impulses that we have, and that coordinates various mental processes. There are significant variations in the decline of brain activity, and some people, the decline is more rapid than with others. Researchers found that less decline was associated statistically with higher levels of education, having a vocation that presented a mental challenge, engaging in regular exercise and good nutrition, and maintaining normal blood pressure. So if one wants to maintain their brain efficiency, in theory, these are things that should benefit. Now, they have found that older people actually use more of their brain tissue to accomplish tasks than what they did when they were younger. And there's some reasons for this. Whereas a single brain region might have been adequate for tasks previously, now due to the slowdown in brain processing, that activity may need to spill over into other areas of the brain. Whereas a certain number of neurons were sufficient to accomplish certain tasks previously, now more neurons need to be recruited for that task. Now, most of the time this is not evident. You will find that typically people are sharp on everyday tasks. Doesn't tend to show up there. On the other hand, when we present them with more difficult tasks or ask them to multitask, then this becomes more evident. For example, the older person driving a car in light traffic on roads that they're very familiar with often has no difficulty. However, if they are on an unfamiliar expressway where the traffic is traveling very fast and there are many people changing lanes, very heavy traffic, that person might find that to be overwhelming now because their reserve capacity for processing that information has been exceeded, whereas that reserve for tasks was not challenged in just this simple everyday driving. The validity of cognitive testing in older studies has been questioned, and it appears these older studies overestimated the decline of mental abilities of older people because these studies put them into an environment that was unfamiliar, that put them at a disadvantage. Many of these studies, the older person was asked to do tasks in the late afternoon, whereas they tended to be sharper early in the day. They often were put in an unfamiliar setting, often asked to come to a major university to be tested, a place that was very unfamiliar and produced a great deal of anxiety. Then they were asked to do often unfamiliar tasks, whereas they would be compared with younger people who were familiar with those tasks. And they maybe were asked to use various memory aids, yet older people tend to be resistant to doing so, and so actually did not take advantage of those. The older person tends to be more cautious in answering questions as well, and so often not enough time was allotted for them to respond to mental tasks. If more time had been allowed, they may have been able to complete them successfully. Now that has since been recognized as a problem, the ecological validity of those cognitive tests. And recent studies put the older person in a more familiar situation, and these show less decline in brain activity than was previously thought. Now, the usual decline in information processing after age 65 in part is due to less input. And because of the decline of vision, hearing, and so forth, some information may never reach their brain. And information that was below the sensory threshold previously now goes undetected. For example, with a person's hearing sounds that they previously could hear, they may not be able to detect. So as a person is speaking, they may miss some things. Also, even if the information does reach their brain, it may not be processed correctly. It may not be stored correctly. And so again, the person is unable to use that information. Therefore, important information may be distorted or lost, yet the person is not aware of it. This happens sometimes when an older person who has a hearing deficit is listening to someone and they miss fragments of what has been said and are distracted by trying to figure out what it was that they'd missed. Meanwhile, the speaker continues on and they have missed even more. So you can see how sometimes the problem accumulates. There also is a decline in the storage of information as people get older. This is in part due to stereotype threat, where a fear of memory loss impairs their ability to process that information to store it for later use. Some aspects of memory remain strong throughout late adulthood while others don't. For example, vocabulary, semantic memory, knowing what the words mean, usually remains good into very, very late adulthood. On the other hand, episodic memory, memory of events that have happened as time goes along, tends to decline. Now that said, the person might remember episodes from earlier in their lifetime very well, but yet as they get older, they have more difficulty storing information about more recent events. Also, source amnesia becomes more common, where the person attributes information to the wrong source. The person might say, "Oh, I think my son told me that," when in fact they heard it on a TV commercial. Working memory also declines as people age. It takes longer to perceive and process sensations, and so some information being held in working memory may fade before the person actually has a chance to process that information. Now that said, Verhagen suggested that when older people can take their time and concentrate, their working memory seems as good as ever. And you can see this sometimes. If we have an older person who is, say, calculating something, maybe adding up how much they are going to owe with some items they're purchasing, if we ask them a question while they're doing that, often they'll tell us, just a moment, let me go ahead and finish what I'm doing here, and then you can ask me. They're trying to filter out distractions so that they can concentrate on that memory task of remembering how much each thing they were going to purchase cost, and then adding it up in their head. So sometimes they will just simply try to compensate for not having as much power in working memory. Control processes also decline as people pass age 65. Control processes are mental processes that regulate the analysis and flow of information. And this would include memory strategies, strategies we use to help ourselves retrieve information that we've stored, selective attention, in which we focus on certain information while filtering out distractions. Control processes also include the rules or strategies that we use for problem solving. And each of these becomes less effective as the person gets older. This is due to changes in the prefrontal cortex, where these control processes are conducted. Now, because the person then is not as strong when it comes to these control processes, it's more difficult for them to evaluate and utilize new information. So they may prefer to stick to preconceived ideas rather than consider new information. And when we offer them new information, they'll say, well, don't confuse me with so many facts. I sort of have an idea of how this works already. They also will tend to rely on general principles, stick with simply a political party rather than evaluating various candidates, or just use basic rules of thumbs to make decisions. Now, when we look at this, we might think, well, they're just set in their ways, their attitude may appear fixed, they are resistant to change, but not necessarily because they're stubborn. It may be just difficult for them to utilize new information. That said, again, they can benefit from effective memory strategies that help them to utilize new information better. Studies indicate that there is a gradual decline in the output of all of the primary mental abilities. This would include verbal meaning. This would include spatial orientation, inductive reasoning, number ability, and word fluency. Word fluency is the ability to think of numerous words in a particular category within a particular time frame. What they also know is that health is a better predictor of decline in mental ability than age is. People that have good health tend to maintain their mental abilities more readily than those that have health problems. In fact, some studies have indicated that you could, to some extent, predict cognitive ability in older people by simply tracking how rapidly they walked. Those that walked more rapidly tended to be more mentally sharp as well. Now, there is a situation where there is a more rapid decline in mental ability called terminal decline, and here a rapid decline may occur as death approaches in the last days or weeks before the person passes away. Once again, we have learned that training can help improve cognitive ability even with the very old. So even there, with some special training, we may be able to help compensate for some loss of processing power.